Welcome to our webinar series, which is part of the Nexus monARC project. Today's topic are science data repositories. We will talk about why you should share your research, what FAIR data is, what types of repositories exist, and how you can find a fitting repository for your data. The first question we should ask, I think, is why should we share our data? Well, sharing research data has many benefits for researchers, especially if the data is deposited in a repository. First, data shared in a repository is more easily discoverable, accessible, and reusable, which usually means more attention and impact factor for your research. Second, data transparency supports reproducibility and reanalysis. Curated repositories also assign a unique identifier, so your data is easier to find for more funders and institutions. Publishers often encourage or require data sharing in an effort to support reproducibility, which demonstrates integrity and creates trust among readers. Third, data repositories keep your data safe and accessible. Whether you upgrade your computer, move to a new institution, or lose touch with a past collaborator, your data remains stable and accessible. Repository use makes it easier to claim academic credit for data collection and curation. Repositories also assign unique identifiers, so your data is easier to cite. More and more funders, institutions, and publishers encourage or require data sharing in an effort to support reproducibility. For example, the projects funded by the EU Horizon Fund are all required to publish their findings as well as their data to open access journals and data repositories. Now, I mentioned fair data. Well, what is fair data? When research data is shared, it should be shared in a way that promotes the broadest reuse of the data. For that, the FAIR data principles have been developed. FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. In this context, findable means that the data is labeled with a persistent identifier, or PID for short, and accompanied by rich metadata which makes the data more findable for humans and computers, which is a core principle of the FAIR data principles, as researchers rely more and more on the automated processing of data due to the sheer volume and speed new data is generated at. Accessible means the data is easily retrievable using standard communication protocols which are free and universally implementable. This includes authentication and authorization protocols where necessary, for example, in the case of human studies with sensitive participants' data. In general, the data should be as open as possible and as closed as necessary. Interoperable means the data should use a standardized and controlled vocabulary for its data and metadata to ensure compatibility and machine readability. This enables the data to be interoperated with other data for workflows and analysis. Reusable means the data should include rich metadata and be well described to give clear provenance and traceability so others can reuse and replicate the data. The data must also come with clear and open data usage licenses and meet the domain-specific standards to be of high value for other researchers. Now, I mentioned metadata and persistent identifiers a few times. Well, what are they? Metadata is simply speaking data about data. It is essential information about data which is recorded in a highly structured way that makes it machine readable so it can be used to categorize, filter, and find data. In addition to general information about the data, like the title, the author, and the time frame the data or work was concluded in, it also includes information about the file types included, how you can reuse and access the data by stating the license the data was published under, and the publications linked to the data. When uploading data to a repository, the users are required to give a lot of metadata or information about the data they are uploading, which later helps others to efficiently find, understand, and reuse the data. Persistent identifiers, or PIDs for short, are long-lasting references to digital objects of different types. The identifier is used to uniquely label an object. They are labels that locate, identify, and share information about digital objects persistently without rotting away, like many URLs often do. In that way, they allow different platforms to exchange information consistently and unambiguously, and thus provide a reliable way to track citations and the reuse of datasets. Popular examples for PIDs are the ISBN for books, the DOIs for publications and the datasets, or the relatively new ORCID identifier, which provides scientific authors with a unique identifier for themselves, which they can use to link all their contributions to the scientific community to their own profile. Now let's talk about the different types of repositories that exist. First one I want to talk about are generic repositories. These house and share data regardless of their type, format, or content or subject. Popular examples are Zenodo, Mendeley Data, or Figshare. In contrast to these are domain-specific repositories. These house and share data of a specific type or related to specific discipline. These are very valuable because they are enriched in data for a specific subject. They often have specialized metadata and annotations for the specific data they host, which makes filtering and reusing the data even easier. They are often the best choice if available, but there aren't domain-specific repositories available for every research field. Another option you have are institutional repositories. These have or house data from their own research and are often hosted by the institution themselves. Now, when choosing a data repository, you should look out for certain characteristics that make the repository a good choice to ensure fair and long-lasting data sharing. In the case of projects funded by the European Commission under the Horizon Europe program, there are some requirements and recommendations because here all data and any information needed to replicate, validate, and reuse the results of the study or the analysis of the data has to be deposited in a trusted repository. This includes details of any software, instrument, or other tool used to process the results, as well as the raw data where appropriate. There are some exceptions to these requirements, as I already mentioned, when confidentiality is needed, for example, to protect personal data of research participants. But now let's talk about the requirements for publishing the data and accompanying information if you're funded by the EU Horizon program. There has to be free and easy access to the data, so your data cannot be hidden behind any sort of paywall or subscription model. The repository and you have to use open file formats where possible. This increases the reusability for others, which would otherwise be limited when proprietary formats are used, which require expensive software to view. Another requirement is the application of an open license to your data, so others can reuse the data freely. Here the CC0 license is encouraged, which does not retain any rights to the data, but the CC BY license is also acceptable, which requires others to attribute you when using your data. If you want more information about the types of open licenses, you can watch our webinar about open access publishing, where we take a closer look at them. Another requirement for publishing under the EU Horizon program is the assignment of a commonly persistent identifier such as a DOI or a session number. But other not so common PIDs are also accepted if the trusted repository uses them. Depending on your field of research, there may be data sharing standards that include common formats, structures, and annotations for your data. The use of such standards further increases the usability of your data and promotes trust in your work. And finally, the repositories or repository guidelines should align with the fair sharing principles. I covered most of them already with the previous points, but there are some small aspects to the fair sharing principles that haven't been mentioned that you can read about on the Open Research website. Lastly, I wanted to mention that the European Commission highly encourages the use of certified repositories. These repositories get certified by independent organizations according to a list of requirements that include plans for long-term sustainability, provision of retention policies, appropriate curation and quality assurance mechanisms, and many other factors. But there are many different certificates a repository can obtain, with the most prominent being the Core Trust Seal. Repositories with this certificate are generally recommended by the European Commission, but there are also data repositories without any certificates, which nonetheless have established themselves in certain research fields or have a big and long-standing user base like Zenodo, which are expected to apply for certification in the near future, but haven't yet, but they are also recommended by the European Commission. Now, Finding an appropriate repository can be quite challenging because there are a lot of repositories to choose from. But now that we talked about characteristics, I can show you ways how you can find repositories for your data. If your project is funded by the European Commission, it may be really easy, as the European Commission requires some types of research data to be published in certain repositories. For example, any X-ray data has to be uploaded to the coherent X-ray imaging data bank, or geochemical data which has to be uploaded to the EarthCam repository. The list of European Commission approved and required repositories can be viewed on their website, which was on the last slide. If your work does not fall into one of those categories, I can recommend you some ways to find good repositories for your data. Generally, the European Commission and various other organizations recommend to store data in domain-specific repositories. If they are non-available, the data should be stored in an institutional repository if it checks the criteria we discussed earlier. Otherwise, one of the many well-established general repositories like B2Share, Figshare, or Zenodo are recommended. To find a fitting repository, you can use tools like FairSharing and R-Free Data. FairSharing.org is a good place to find a suitable database, but also to learn about data and metadata standards. The most popular option when searching for repositories is definitely rfreedata.org. R-Free Data has indexed over 3,200 data repositories and lets you filter your results by a plethora of different attributes, from subjects covered by the repository, over the PID types and licenses used, to filtering for certain keywords or metadata standards. When reviewing the results, you can immediately see the subjects and the data type covered by the repository, as well as a short abstract with general information about the repository. It also has helpful indicators to quickly know whether a repository has unrestricted access to its data, if it used PIDs, or if it holds some type of certificate. In the context of the Nexus monARC project and its research on monitoring multi-stress environments, I wanted to share 3 domain-specific repositories which the data we generate in the Nexus monARC project would fit in. Repositories are Pangaea, the EarthCam library, and the Knowledge Network for Biocomplexity. They are all recommended by European Commission and are good examples for data repositories that follow the FAIR data principles and aim for long-term access to all the datasets they host. The biggest and probably most known repository for geospatial or georeferenced observational and experimental data is the Pangaea repository. It hosts over 28,000 datasets which are freely accessible without an account on the website. These datasets and its metadata were all quality checked, harmonized, and processed for machine readability by the editorial board to allow efficient and reliable reuse of the data. These include diverse and environmental science datasets, including oceanography, climate research, marine geology, and atmospheric sciences. The repository includes oceanic data like temperature, salinity, and nutrients, as well as marine biodiversity and ecosystem information. Paleoclimate datasets such as sediment, ice core records, and isotopic data is available for studying past climate conditions. Environmental monitoring data covers air and water quality, pollutant levels, and ecological surveys. Geospatial datasets, including GIS data and satellite imagery, provide information on landscape dynamics and environmental changes. The EarthCam library contains diverse datasets related to geochemistry, including major trace and isotopic compositions of Earth materials. The library hosts data on rock and mineral compositions, geochemical analysis of geological samples, and elemental abundance measurements. Researchers can access datasets related to petrology, volcanology, tectonics, and mineralogy, providing valuable information for understanding Earth's processes and history. EarthCam library includes EarthCam EarthCam library contains diverse datasets related to geochemistry, including major, trace, and isotopic compositions of Earth materials. The library hosts data on rock and mineral compositions, geochemical analysis of geological samples, and elemental abundance measurements. Researchers can access datasets related to petrology, volcanology, tectonics, and mineralogy, providing valuable information for understanding Earth's processes and history. EarthChem library includes geochronological data such as radiometric ages and isotopic dating, important for reconstructing the timing of geological events. Additionally, the library provides access to geochemical data on environmental and anthropogenic impacts, helping to assess the influence of human activity on Earth's geochemical cycles. The last repository I want to present to you is the Knowledge Network for Biocomplexity. The KNB also hosts over 28,000 datasets and accepts all environmental or ecological related data, and publishes the datasets with DOI for the express purpose of ensuring long-term access to these datasets. With all this information about data repositories, I hope that you now know why data sharing is important, what aspects are important when sharing data, and which characteristics of data repositories are desirable, and how you can find suitable repositories for your research data. If you have any questions about a topic, you can ask them at our live Q&A session. The meeting is open for anyone and can be accessed by scanning the QR code in the thumbnail or using the link in the description, where the time and date also will be posted. Now, I thank you for your attention and hope you had a great time.